The chamber fell into silence the moment the words were spoken aloud. At first, I thought it was only my own heartbeat I heard, pounding so violently in my chest that I could scarcely breathe. But no, the silence was real. Every nobleman, every courtier, every servant within the king's hall had turned toward me, their eyes wide with disbelief, some glittering with cruel amusement. In the center of the great marble floor, a young page trembled as he held a parchment in his hands. His voice cracked as he read, though the words no longer belonged to him, they belonged to me. My secret words, your eyes are the dawn that breaks my sorrow. Your voice, the only hymn I crave in the stillness of night. If the world should end, let it end with your name upon my lips. I wanted the earth to open and swallow me whole. Those words were never meant to leave the solitude of my chamber. They were mine, my hidden devotion, poured onto parchment in the quiet of night, a confession I had never dared to give. Yet now here they were, echoing off vaulted ceilings, rolling across the grand hall like thunder. The king shifted upon his throne, his crown glinting in the torchlight. His face revealed nothing, but his silence cut sharper than 1,000 accusations. Beside him, the queen's painted lips curved into a slow, venomous smile. She knew. Somehow she had arranged this, but it was not their gaze that made my knees weaken, it was his Sir Rowan. The knight who had lived in my heart long before my hand had betrayed me to parchment, stood among the guard. His storm-gray eyes were fixed on me, unreadable, though I prayed. Oh, how I prayed that he had not heard the truth within those lines. Whispers began to ripple through the court. Laughter followed, cruel and stinging. A letter? For a knight? How shameless. Does she not fear disgrace? I felt the heat of humiliation scorch my cheeks. My fingers clenched the folds of my gown, as if I could tear myself from the moment and escape. But there was no escape. My secret had been laid bare for all to mock. The page faltered, glancing toward me, as though begging forgiveness for being the mouthpiece of my shame. But the queen's hand flicked in the air, commanding him to continue. His voice shook as he obeyed, each word a dagger driving deeper. You are my hidden vow, my forbidden prayer, my eternal truth. I would rather be ruined than live without you. Gasps filled the hall. Somewhere, someone laughed openly, and I could no longer breathe. The letter had been exposed. And so had I. Yet, beyond the humiliation, beyond the laughter and the whispers, there was something more dangerous stirring inside me. Memory. I remembered the night I wrote those words, with nothing but a single candle lighting my chamber. My quill trembled in my hand as though it knew my heart was reckless, daring to put into ink what no noblewoman should ever confess. My name is Lady Eveline Marlowe, daughter of Lord Alaric Marlowe, a minor noble whose lands stretched no further than a few meadows and a river bend. My father always said I was too fragile for court, too tender-hearted for politics. But I knew the truth. I was not fragile. I was simply different. While the ladies of the court busied themselves with gossip and silken embroidery, I filled pages upon pages with poetry no one was meant to read. My solace was ink, my confessor the parchment. I wrote because I could not speak aloud the storm that dwelled in me. And always, that storm carried one name, Sir Rowan. He was no prince, number lord, no heir to a great fortune, only a knight, sworn to protect the royal family. Yet in his presence the world stilled. He bore no jewels but the honesty of his gaze, no crown but the honor in his silence. His laughter rare, though it was lingered with me like the warmth of sunlight long after it had faded. From the first day I saw him at the training yard, his armor glinting beneath the sun, I knew I was lost. Not because he noticed me, but because he didn't. He never looked at me as others did, never weighing my worth by my father's land or my dowry, never expecting me to smile and flatter.
He looked past me as if my existence were a fleeting shadow.
And somehow that made him all the more unattainable, all the more magnetic. So I wrote to him, though he never knew. Letter after letter, 1,000 confessions that never touched his hands. Until one night, I sealed one with wax, telling myself it was safe to keep, hidden among my journals, but now here it was, unveiled before the court. My sanctuary transformed into a weapon against me. As the queen's gaze pierced me from her throne, I realized with sudden clarity this was no accident. She wanted me humiliated. She wanted me broken, and the court would feast upon my ruin like wolves upon a fallen deer. But I was not yet fallen, not entirely. Asterisk for though the queen's eyes lingered on me like daggers. I forced myself to stand straighter, to lift my chin as though I were carved from stone. My shame was real, but so too was my pride. If I crumbled here, in front of them all, then I would give her exactly what she wanted, the courtiers whispered among themselves, their jeweled sleeves brushing together like restless wings of birds eager for a feast of gossip. Some smirked, some sneered, but a few, a very few, looked at me with something that might have been pity, and then there was him, the crown Prince Alistair. He sat at the foot of the throne, his golden hair catching the light like fire, his expression unreadable.
His lips curved not into mockery,
but into something softer, intrigued, curious, as though, for the first time, I was more than just another lady of little importance. That look frightened me more than the laughter. Sir Rowan, however, would not meet my gaze. His posture was stiff, disciplined, the very image of loyalty to the crown. But I saw the tension in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. He had heard the words. He knew they were meant for him, and yet...
He remained silent when the queen dismissed the hall.
Her voice sharp with feigned sweetness, I could scarcely feel my legs beneath me. The courtiers spilled out like a river of silks and jewels, each of them carrying pieces of my humiliation to scatter like seeds across the kingdom. I walked as though in a dream, the grand columns and painted ceilings of the palace blurring above me. Behind me, I felt the weight of footsteps too measured. Too close, Lady Eveline, a voice called softly. I turned, and there he was, Prince Alistair. His smile was faint but deliberate, the kind of smile that held secrets. "You write beautifully," he said. Dangerously, perhaps, but beautifully. I wanted to answer, but my voice faltered. The prince had noticed me. The court had marked me. And somewhere, behind gilded armor, the knight I loved remained silent. I was not yet fallen. But I was standing upon the edge. Asterisk and the queen, it seemed, had every intention of giving me the final push. The morning after my disgrace, a summons arrived sealed with the royal crest. My hands trembled as I broke the wax. Few nobles were ever called so directly by Her Majesty, and never with kindness in her intent. When I entered her solar, the air was thick with the scent of roses, cloying and suffocating. The queen reclined on a velvet chair, her jeweled fingers idly stroking the mane of a snow-white cat that purred against her lap. Her smile, however, was anything but gentle. "Lady Eveline," she purred, echoing the cat's tone. "Such a tender heart you possess. To write such impassioned verses." "The court has not spoken of anything else since yesterday," I curtsied, though my knees wavered. "Your Majesty," I whispered, unsure if I should defend myself or beg forgiveness. She tilted her head, studying me as though I were a puzzle. "Do you know what happens, child, to women who bare their hearts too freely? They are eaten alive, not by wolves, but by whispers. And whispers, my dear, are far more enduring." My breath caught. This was no warning. It was a threat wrapped in silk. Then, with a flick of her hand, she dismissed her attendants. The chamber emptied until only the queen and I remained. Her eyes gleamed as she leaned closer, her words like poisoned honey. "You must forget him," she said. "Forget your knight. Forget your poetry. If you do not, I will see to it that your father loses his lands, and your name is buried beneath laughter for generations." The roses around us seemed to choke the air from my lungs. She wasn't simply mocking me now, she was binding me with chains invisible yet unbreakable. I lowered my gaze, my fists hidden in my skirts, and swallowed the cry rising in my throat. She wanted my silence. She wanted my surrender, but even as her threats burned into me, a spark ignited deep within my chest. For if she feared my words so greatly, then perhaps they held more power than I had ever realized. For if she feared my words so greatly, then perhaps they held more power than I had ever realized. That thought flickered like a candle in the darkness of my mind. Yet it was swiftly threatened by the chill that followed. The queen was not a woman of idle words, her threats were seeds already planted. and I could almost hear their roots spreading through the palace walls. By evening, whispers filled the corridors. Servants curtsied with mocking grins. Courtiers paused their conversations when I passed, only to erupt into hushed laughter once my back was turned. I had become a spectacle, a jest, a cautionary tale, but it was worse than that. At supper, my father's place at the high table was empty. A steward delivered the news in tones too polite to be anything but cruel. Lord Marlowe had been summoned back to his estate at once, his loyalty under review. My chest constricted as I understood the truth. This was the Queen's hand, already tightening around us. And then, as if to salt the wound, Prince Alistair chose that moment to rise. His golden hair caught the torchlight as he lifted his goblet, his voice ringing out for all to hear. "To Lady Eveline," he declared, his smile warm, deliberate, dangerous. "A heart so brave deserves to be celebrated, not shamed." The hall erupted into murmurs. Some gasped, some laughed louder, but all eyes turned to me. My cheeks flamed as the prince's gaze lingered. Bold and unashamed, I dared not look at Rowan, yet out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing rigid among the guards, his jaw set, his hand tightening against the hilt of his sword. Silent, always silent. The Queen's smile, however, was sharper than any blade. She had me cornered, and she knew it. If I leaned toward the prince, I would be her pawn. If I clung to Rowan, she would destroy us both. That night, as I sat alone in my chamber, my ink-stained fingers clutching another half-written letter, I dared not finish. A truth settled over me like a shroud. I was no longer simply a foolish girl with a secret love. I was a piece in the Queen's game, and the board was tilting against me. Asterisk. But if I was a piece in the Queen's game, then I would not be her pawn. I would become something greater, something unexpected. That night, I lit every candle in my chamber, the golden flames dancing across the walls as though echoing the storm within me. My journal lay open before me, its pages already filled with the echoes of my heart. For years, my words had been my secret refuge, written only for myself, never meant to touch another soul. But now I understood. Words could topple kingdoms. Words had shaken the Queen enough to threaten me. Words had drawn the prince's eyes and silenced the knight who held my heart. I dipped my quill, my hand steady despite the tremor in my chest. I did not write a love letter this time. I wrote a vow. If they laugh, let them laugh. If they scorn, let them scorn. I will not silence the voice that was given to me. I will wield it not in shame, but in truth. My heart is not weakness. My heart is my strength. When I finished, I sealed the parchment not with the wax of secrecy, but with the emblem of my house of falcon in flight. A symbol of freedom. In the days that followed, I began to share my verses not whispered in secrecy, but read aloud in the quiet corners of the palace garden, where servants and even a few courtiers gathered in secret. I spoke not only of love, but of honesty, of courage, of longing for a world where a woman's worth was not measured by whispers. And to my astonishment, they listened. A maid slipped me a pressed flower in thanks. A young squire bowed low, whispering that my words gave him hope. Even the stony-faced steward lingered longer than necessary, pretending to scold but never leaving until I finished reading. The Queen's eyes followed me more sharply than ever. The prince's smile grew bolder, his glances longer. And Rowan, oh Rowan, I caught him once in the shadows beyond the garden, watching silently, his gaze heavy with something I could not name. I had set my course. No longer a secret writer, no longer a girl trembling at whispers. I would prove to them all that love, in its truest form, was not shame, but defiance. Asterisk, yet defiance. I soon learned, came at a cost. Whispers grew louder, sharper, their edges cutting into me wherever I walked. The Queen's allies sneered openly now, their laughter a constant reminder that I was still the girl whose letter had been read aloud in the king's court. And yet, in the midst of the ridicule, I felt the strangest presence. Protection. It began subtly. A space cleared in the corridors where before I had been jostled. A shadow lingered just beyond the torchlight during my nightly walks through the garden. When cruel laughter rang too close, it fell silent at the quiet step of armored boots. Sir Rowan, he never spoke. He never drew attention. But his silence was not indifference, it was a shield. One evening, as I gathered my pages beneath the blossoming lindens, the torchlight flickered, and I knew without turning that he was near. My heart thundered as I whispered into the night, "Why do you stand in the shadows if not to hear?" "For the first time," he answered. His voice was low, strained, as though every word cost him dearly. "Because to stand in the light would mean betraying my oath." I turned, meeting his storm-gray eyes, and in them I saw not distance but torment. He wanted to speak, to say more, but he clenched his jaw and bowed before melting back into the darkness. It should have been enough, that fleeting confession hidden in shadows. But in the world of the court, silence could be as dangerous as words. The next day, the queen cornered me once more, her tone laced with venomous sweetness. "Careful, my dear," she said, her jeweled hand brushing my sleeve as if in affection. "Knights who linger near fallen maidens are soon dragged down with them. Do you truly wish to destroy him as well?" My throat burned, but I held my ground. She was wrong. My words would not destroy him. They would save us both if only I could find the courage to bring them fully into the light. Yet as I left her chamber, my resolve wavered. For I saw Rowan across the hall, standing tall among his brothers in arms, his face carved into perfect obedience. And in that moment I realized defiance could unite us. Or it could tear us apart forever. Asterisk, the queen made certain the tearing began at once, within days. The palace was thick with venomous murmurs. At first, they called me naive, foolish, a girl blinded by her heart. But soon the whispers sharpened, carved into accusations that dripped with malice. "She seeks to climb," they hissed behind painted fans. "First the knight, then the prince. A ladder of scandal. She would trade her father's meadows for a crown." Each word struck like a lash. And yet none stung more than those spoken openly at supper. The queen's voice rang clear above the hall, dripping with mock concern. "It is tragic, is it not?" she said to the lords and ladies at her side. "A young woman so desperate for affection that she clings to any man with influence, first a knight, now perhaps a prince?" Laughter rippled through the hall like fire catching dry leaves. I felt my skin burn as eyes turned to me, some mocking, others gleaming with cruel delight. My hands shook around my goblet, but I refused to let it spill. Across the table, Prince Alistair did not laugh. His gaze fixed upon me, unwavering, daring. He raised his glass in silent defiance of his mother, his smile calm but deliberate, and yet it was Rowan's silence that broke me. He stood at his post, eyes fixed straight ahead. As though the storm consuming me had nothing to do with him, I told myself he could not speak. That his oath bound him, but the ache in my chest grew heavier all the same. That night, when I returned to my chamber, I found a scrap of parchment slipped beneath my door. My breath caught as I recognized the hand not flowing like mine, but sharp and deliberate, unmistakably his. "I hear. I see. I cannot speak. But know this, you are not alone." My tears blurred the words. But the flame inside me burned brighter than ever. The queen's whispers might poison the court. They might shatter my reputation. They might strip me of dignity, but they could not strip me of truth. And the truth was this. My heart belonged to Rowan, asterisk, but the prince's eyes told a different story. In the days that followed, Alistair's gaze sought me with a boldness that set the court aflame with speculation. At feasts, he angled his chair ever so slightly toward mine. In the gardens, he lingered as though by chance, asking questions that pierced deeper than idle chatter. "Do you always write of love, Lady Eveline?" he asked once, his tone soft, curious. "Or do you also write of longing for freedom?" The words struck me like an arrow. Few had ever understood that my letters, my verses, were not only of love for a man, but of a soul yearning to be seen. And in that moment, beneath the dappled sunlight of the royal garden, I saw it in his eyes. He understood, too well. The courtiers noticed, of course. Their whispers shifted from mockery to envy, some even bowing lower when I passed, as though proximity to the prince had already elevated me. The queen, however, watched with venom veiled in grace, her smile tightening each time she caught her son's attention straying toward me, and Rowan. Rowan's silence grew heavier, colder. He still lingered in shadows, still watched with eyes that burned. But he no longer left me scraps of parchment, no longer let slip words of comfort. It was as if the prince's gaze had forced him deeper into his oath of silence. One evening, during a masquerade, Alistair found me alone on the balcony. His mask gleamed gold in the moonlight, his voice warm with both gentleness and fire. "You deserve more than their scorn," he whispered. "More than whispers. More than a life lived in fear of your own heart." He hesitated, his hand brushing the edge of mine. "And if you would let me, Eveline, I would give it to you." The world stilled. The music, the laughter, the glow of the ballroom, it all faded into silence, for there I stood, caught between a knight whose silence spoke louder than any vow, and a prince whose words promised everything I had ever dreamed of, asterisk but promises, I knew were as fragile as parchment in fire. If I accepted his hand, they would say I had schemed for it all along. If I refused, they would call me a fool blinded by a knight who dared not even speak. Either way, I would remain their jest, their scandal, their shame. So I chose another path. I asked for a hearing not in the king's court, where jewels weighed heavier than truth, but in the open square of the city, a place where nobles and commoners alike could hear my voice. My father begged me not to, his eyes shadowed with fear for our family's name, but I stood firm. If my words had ruined me, then only words could save me. The morning of the gathering, I stepped onto the wooden platform, my heart hammering as hundreds of eyes turned toward me. Some curious, some mocking, some merely hungry for entertainment. The queen's spies were among them, their silken hoods gleaming. I held my parchment tight, then let it fall. No more hiding behind written lines. "My lords, my ladies, and all who will hear me," I began, my voice quivering before it steadied. "You mock me for loving. You scorn me for writing. But is love not the noblest of truths? Is a woman's heart so dangerous that it must be silenced, while men may boast of their conquests without shame?" Murmurs rose, sharp and restless. Some nodded, others scoffed. I pressed on, fire rising in my chest. I do not seek a crown. I do not seek riches. I seek only the freedom to feel without ridicule, to speak without fear. If that is folly, then I will gladly be a fool. For a moment there was silence. A fragile, breathless silence. And then dashed laughter. It burst forth from the crowd, rippling outward until it consumed the square. Nobles smirked, commoners chuckled, even a few guards shook their heads. My cheeks burned, my vision blurred, and in that instant I knew my attempt had failed. Through the blur of tears I saw two figures, the queen, smiling like a predator, her victory assured, and Rohan, standing at the edge of the crowd, his fists clenched, his jaw trembling as though holding back words that might shatter his oath. My heart broke, not because they mocked me, but because in trying to save myself I had only proved their jest true, asterisk, and yet the queen was not finished. Days later, an extravagant masquerade was announced, a celebration of peace between kingdoms, though all knew it was but another stage for her games. My name was whispered in every corridor. Would the foolish lady appear? Would she dare show her face after such humiliation? I wanted to hide. Truly I did. But hiding would mean surrender, and surrender was a luxury my heart refused. So, on the night of the masquerade, I stepped into the ballroom draped not in jewels, but in a gown of midnight blue, simple yet defiant. My mask was silver, covering little, for I wished no disguise. Gasps followed me as I entered. Eyes turned. Fans fluttered. Behind golden masks, nobles sneered. Yet among them, I saw the prince's gaze locking with mine, a flicker of admiration softening his features, and beyond him, at the edge of the hall, Rowan, though forbidden to join the dance, his presence was unmistakable. His mask was plain, his posture rigid, but his eyes, those storm-tossed eyes, burned into me as if willing me not to falter. Music swelled, and partners spun across the floor in brilliant patterns. The prince extended his hand to me, his gesture bold, impossible to ignore. "Dance with me," he murmured. The hall stilled. All waited, breath held, for my choice. If I refused, I would insult him before all. If I accepted, the whispers of ambition would drown me forever. I glanced toward Rowan. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly as though warning me. My chest tightened, and yet I placed my hand in Alistair's. The music rose, carrying us into the center of the hall. Step by step, turn by turn, we moved, and with each graceful motion the crowd erupted into murmurs. Some clapped in approval, others smirked, but all eyes were upon us. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like chains. For every time the prince's hand pressed against mine, I felt the absence of Rohan's touch. Every time I smiled for the crowd, I longed for the shadow's quiet comfort. And then, just as the music reached its crescendo, I heard it, a sharp crack. Like glass shattering in the silence, the queen's voice. Behold! She cried from the dais, her mask gleaming with triumph. The lady who would sway both knight and crown, tell me, my lords and ladies, is this not the very picture of ambition? Laughter followed, cruel and cutting. The dance ended, and though the prince held my hand tightly, my heart trembled with the weight of her words. I had thought the square was my lowest fall. But here, under chandeliers of gold, before 1,000 masked faces, I realized my descent had only begun. I fled the ballroom before the final notes of the music had faded. My slippers clattered on the marble floors as laughter followed me like a cruel echo. My gown, heavy with shame, tangled at my feet, and I stumbled into the palace gardens, the cold night air burning my cheeks. There, among roses glistening with dew, I pressed my hands to my face and whispered, "Why must my heart betray me so?" And then I heard footsteps. I turned, expecting perhaps a courtier eager for gossip, but instead it was Rohan. His mask hung loose in his hand, his expression carved with anguish. "Eveline," he said. It was only one word, but it struck me like thunder. For years he had kept his vow of silence. For years he had let his eyes speak what his lips never dared. And now, beneath the moonlight, he had broken it. "You!" My breath caught. "You spoke." He stepped closer, his voice hoarse, trembling as though each syllable carried the weight of a kingdom. "I could not watch them tear you apart. I could not stand by while your heart shattered. My vow was meant to honor the crown, but my silence has dishonored my soul." Tears blurred my vision. "Why now? Why after so long?" His hand hovered near mine, not daring to touch. "Because tonight I saw what I feared most, that you would be lost to me, not by choice, but by force. And I would rather break my oath than lose you forever." The world stilled. The roses, the stars, the hush of the night, it all bent around the enormity of his confession. But even as my heart soared, fear tightened its grip. For I knew the cost of his words. A knight who broke his vow of silence risked exile, disgrace, perhaps even worse. And if the queen learned of this secret, she would wield it like a blade against us both. I whispered, trembling, "Rohan, what have you done?" He met my gaze, unflinching. "What I should have done long ago. Chosen you, not the silence." And in that moment, though the night was dark and perilous, I realized something profound. I was no longer falling, I was beginning to rise. But the queen would not allow it. The very next morning, word spread through the palace like wildfire. Someone had overheard Rohan's voice in the gardens. A knight's broken vow was no trivial matter, it was scandal, treachery, a crime that demanded punishment. I knew instantly whose hand guided the rumor. The queen's smile at breakfast said it all. She lifted her jeweled cup, her eyes glinting like steel as she announced before the court, "There are whispers of dishonor in our midst. A knight who cannot keep his vow is no knight at all." Rohan stood at the edge of the hall, shoulders stiff, gaze fixed ahead. But I could see the tremor in his jaw, the storm he held within. Panic clawed at my chest. If he confessed, he would lose everything. If he denied it, the queen would twist the tale until it ensnared us both. And then, her voice fell like a dagger. "Lady Eveline, you were seen with him that night, were you not?" All eyes turned to me. The hall was silent, suffocating. I could not breathe. If I spoke the truth, that Rohan had broken his silence for me, I would doom him. If I lied, I would condemn myself as deceitful before the crown. Either way, the queen had won, but before I could answer, the prince rose. "Enough," Alistair said, his voice commanding. "This is no trial, mother. It is humiliation disguised as justice. If you would cast judgment, then do it openly, not behind masks of rumor." Gasps echoed. The queen's face hardened. her control threatened. But she did not falter. "Very well," she declared. "Let us judge in the open. If Sir Rowan has truly broken his vow, let him speak before us all here and now." The hall erupted in murmurs. My heart pounded. Rowan's eyes flicked to mine, filled with both defiance and fear. And then, with a slow, steady breath, he stepped forward. "Ask me," he said. His voice strong, deep, undeniable rang through the hall. The crowd gasped. The Queen's lips curved into a smile of triumph, and my heart shattered, for with that single choice, Rowan had sealed his fate. Asterisk. The hall fell silent as though even the chandeliers dared not sway. All eyes fixed on Rowan, the knight who had broken the vow that defined his very existence. The Queen rose from her throne, her gown shimmering like the night sky, her smile cruelly radiant. "You have heard it yourselves," she said, her voice carrying through the vaulted chamber. "The knight's silence has been shattered. By our laws, his honor is forfeit, and so too his place at this court." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some pitied, others smirked, but none dared intervene. To challenge the Queen was to invite ruin. I could not bear it. I stepped forward, my voice trembling but clear. "He broke his vow not out of dishonor, but of love. If such devotion is a crime, then let me be condemned beside him." Gasps filled the hall. The Queen's eyes glittered with delight at my desperation, exactly what she had hungered for. She turned her gaze to the king, who sat silent, wearied by years of her dominance. And then the prince rose once more. "Mother." "Enough," Alistair declared, his hand gripping the edge of the throne. "You would cast aside a loyal knight and humiliate a lady of our court, all to feed your pride. Rowan has served this crown with more honor and silence than many have with words." The Queen's lips tightened. For the first time, she faltered. Yet her voice, when it came, was sharp as steel. "If the knight wishes redemption, let him prove it. Not in whispers of love, but in service to the realm. One last trial impossible, perhaps, but if he succeeds, his place may be restored. If he fails..." Her gaze slid to me like a blade across silk. "Then Lady Eveline will share his downfall." The crowd erupted in a frenzy of whispers. My knees weakened. Rowan's jaw set with iron resolve, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. "I accept," he said, his voice unyielding. And with that, his fate and mine were bound together in a trial designed not for victory, but for ruin. Asterisk. The Queen wasted no time. At dawn the next day, she proclaimed Rowan's trial before the entire court. We gathered in the stone courtyard, where banners fluttered in the cold wind, and the eyes of nobles and commoners alike burned with curiosity. "The knight has broken his vow," the Queen announced, her voice smooth as velvet and sharp as a dagger. "But he shall have one chance to restore his honor. He must retrieve the lost seal of Avalorn, hidden within the ruins beyond the northern woods. A task no man has completed in a century." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The seal of Avalorn was no mere trinket. It was a relic of legend, buried in a place where many had gone and none had returned. To demand it of Rowan was not justice, it was a sentence dressed as mercy. Rowan bowed his head, calm and unyielding. "I accept," my breath caught. To accept was to march into darkness. To refuse was to condemn himself and me at once. I longed to cry out, to beg him to resist, but the fire in his eyes silenced me. He had chosen this path, not for himself, but for us. The prince stepped forward, defiance burning in his gaze. "Mother, this is folly. If you insist upon this trial, then let me accompany him." The Queen's smile was a blade cloaked in silk. "No, my son. The crown has no place in shadows." Her eyes flicked toward me. "But perhaps the lady should go. After all, is she not the cause of this knight's fall?" A chill ran through me as the crowd erupted. Some laughed, others jeered, but all turned to me as if awaiting my collapse. Rowan's voice cut through the noise, steady and fierce. "If Eveline comes with me, it will not be to prove my honor, but to prove ours." The Queen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Her silence was more terrifying than her words. And so, before the court and kingdom alike, it was sealed. Rowan and I would walk into the ruins together, bound not only by love, but by a trial meant to break us. As the torches burned and the crowd dispersed, I clutched Rowan's hand, my heart trembling. What if we fail? I whispered. His answer was soft, resolute. Then we failed together, and though the night pressed heavy around us, I realized the truest trial was not the ruins that awaited, but whether love could endure when the world itself conspired to tear it apart. The northern woods loomed before us like a cathedral of shadows, their branches clawing at the sky. Beyond them, the ruins of Avalorn waited, a place of forgotten stone and whispered curses. Torches in hand, Rowan and I crossed the threshold, our steps echoing against the silence of centuries. The path twisted, treacherous as if the forest itself sought to turn us back. Yet Rowan's hand never left mine, and with each step I drew strength from the steadiness of his grip. When at last we reached the ruins, the air grew heavy, the silence absolute. Broken columns jutted from the earth like bones, and at the heart of it all stood an altar draped in ivy, upon which rested a small chest bound in iron. The seal, Rowan murmured. We approached together, but as he reached for it, the ground trembled beneath our feet. The chest shimmered with an otherworldly light, and a voice not of man, but of something older echoed through the stones. Only the pure of heart may claim the seal, one bound by truth, one bound by love. Betrayal shall shatter all. I froze, terror prickling through me. This was no simple relic, it was a test, one that cared nothing for crowns or courts. Rowan looked at me, his eyes fierce but tender. We can do this, together. I nodded, and together we placed our hands upon the chest. The iron bindings burned like fire, forcing us to hold tighter, to endure the pain. Images flashed before my eyes, my letters mocked. The queen's cruelty, Rowan's silence, the prince's gaze. Doubt clawed at me, whispering that I was unworthy, that my love was folly. But then Rowan's voice cut through the storm, steady and unwavering. Eveline, look at me. I did. And in his eyes I saw no shame, no fear, only truth. Only love. The fire seared, then softened, and with a sound like breaking chains, the chest opened. Inside, upon a cushion of velvet, lay the seal of Avalorn, glowing with a light both fierce and gentle. We had passed. I laughed through tears, clutching Rowan's hand as the ruins seemed to sigh with release. For the first time, I felt the weight of scorn, of ridicule, of fear, all of it lift from my heart. And I knew our love was no jest. It was our triumph. Together we carried the seal back through the forest, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. As though the world itself celebrated our return, the queen awaited us in the courtyard, her smile brittle, her eyes sharp. But when Rowan placed the seal before the throne, even she could not deny the truth. The people cheered. The prince bowed his head in respect. And Rowan, with his voice steady as the morning sun, declared, "My vow is no longer silence." "My vow is her," the court erupted, not with laughter, but with applause. And for the first time, I stood not as the jester of love, but as its victor. The cheers of the court echoed long after the torches dimmed. But in my heart, it was the quiet that mattered most. The quiet of Rowan's hand entwined with mine. The quiet of a vow remade, not in silence, but in truth. The queen retreated into her throne that day, her schemes fractured by a power she could neither twist nor conquer. The prince, noble and kind, offered me a smile of parting, no bitterness, only respect. And for the first time, I understood love was not a crown to be won, nor a game to be played, but a fire that endured even in shadows. As days turned into weeks, the whispers that once mocked me softened into songs. My letters, once objects of ridicule, were now read aloud in the square, not as folly, but as proof that the heart's words carried strength no blade could rival. Children giggled over them, lovers held them close, and even the weary found hope in them. And Rowan, my Rowan, he no longer hid behind silence. His words were rare, but each one carried the weight of oceans. And when he told me, "You are my honor," I knew I had found the home I had always sought, not in halls of gold, but in the heart of the one who chose me. Again and again, looking back now, I see the jest was never theirs to make. For they laughed at love, and love, in turn, laughed at them. If there is one truth this tale has carved into me, it is this: love does not beg for approval. Love does not shrink beneath scorn. Love rises unyielding until even the proudest voices fall silent before it. And so, I close my story not with a crown upon my head, nor with the Queen's blessing, but with something far greater, a heart unashamed, a heart that dares to love and will never again be silenced.